And now to our debate and to two men who have played key roles in NATO and nuclear issues over the years. Paul Nitze has served in nearly every post-war administration. He retired earlier this week from his post as Ambassador at Large and Special Advisor to the President and the Secretary of State on arms control matters. It was his interview in the New York Times critical of the Bush position on the short-range missiles that moved that issue to the front burner in Washington. Henry Kissinger was Secretary of State during the Nixon and Ford administrations. He now heads up an international consulting firm in New York. He joins us from Kent, Connecticut. Ambassador Nitze, why should there be negotiations?
I think it is politically impossible for any German government to agree to two propositions concurrently. One is that they agree to modernizing the Lance missile or similar missiles of short range from 0 to 300 miles in range, and concurrently to agree that there should be no negotiations. Certainly German public opinion is such that that is an impossible combination for anybody to support in Germany. It won't move in Germany. Therefore, you've got to make up your mind which is the most important for us. Frankly, I think it's so important that Germany continues to develop in a way in which it can be a cooperative and useful member of NATO. That's of vast importance, that we have to pay some attention to what the political situation in Germany is and try to be helpful to an evolution of German public opinion, which is on the side of Germany continuing to play a useful role in NATO and thereby be able to collaborate with us.
And we can do that, in your opinion, without jeopardizing NATO security?
I believe we can. And so that I think the first thing that we would want to do is to talk to the Germans and see to it, and see whether or not they would back us in resisting and saying now and joining us and saying, as Kohl has said, that he is not for a 000. He's not for the total elimination, the total unilateral elimination of these short-range missiles. What he wants us to do is to negotiate for equal ceilings with the Soviet Union. And those, I see no reason why we shouldn't negotiate for equal ceilings.
You expressed this opinion to the Bush administration before you left office, did you not?
I did indeed.
And what reaction did you get?
At that time, no firm reaction.
I see.
But eventually they came to a conclusion different from...
You were quoted in the New York Times as saying that one of the reasons you believe that they reacted negatively was because there were so many new appointees in the Bush administration with links to Henry Kissinger. What did you mean?
Well, I meant exactly that, because Mr. Kissinger's position has long been against even the INF results. He has maintained that there would be better if there were concurrent progress in the elimination, or at least the balancing of the conventional forces. And undoubtedly that is true. But the question at issue is, how long is it going to take you to get the balance of the conventional forces? I don't think it's going to happen overnight.
Mr. Kissinger, do you take credit for this no-negotiate position of the Bush administration?
Absolutely not. I support that position very strongly, but it is a decision to which they came by themselves and not under any aegis of mine. My view has been repeatedly stated. I did indeed believe that the INF agreement was a mistake because it removed those weapons from Germany and from Europe by which an attack on Europe could be answered by retaliation on the territory of the attacker. And it left only those weapons in which the victim's territory became the chief target of nuclear retaliation. That created, indeed, a very difficult situation for the German government. I would not have minded at all a 50% reduction of the strategic forces in Europe. Secondly, it is quite true that I believe that the conventional arms control and nuclear arms control ought to be in some balance to each other. It makes absolutely no sense that the threat to the security of Europe, which has been the Soviet conventional strengths plus the geographic proximity to which our response was in part the nuclear deterrent, that all the arms control negotiations should be focused on nuclear weapons, and that no progress, whatever has yet been made, on conventional arms control. It is also an evasion to say that one can have a negotiation on these short-range weapons, but have a ceiling that is higher than zero. We have 88 short-range weapons in Germany. What level is better than 88? It's 52, 36. Inevitably, once these negotiations start, they will tend towards zero. And the pressure, the same domestic pressure that is now being used to justify the beginning of negotiations, will lead almost inexorably to zero. Then we will be in the position in which the conventional arms are essentially not under control. Every significant nuclear arm in Europe has been either eliminated or sharply reduced. On top of it, there'll be a 50% reduction in our strategic forces, and it is psychologically an unbalanced negotiation, and for that reason, the Bush administration is absolutely correct, in my view, in insisting that first that we've now done a substantial amount of nuclear arms control, and there should now be major progress in conventional arms control before we go into negotiations on the short-range weapons.
Ambassador Nitze?
The question of conventional arms reductions on a balanced conventional scene has been before us for a long period of time. We've been negotiating this for, 16 years. And it is quite clear that the way in which one has to negotiate on conventional arms balance is through NATO, through the members of NATO, through 15, 16 nations negotiating with the Soviet bloc. Multilateral negotiation is a very difficult thing to do with any degree of expedition. It's extremely hard. That's why it's taken us, we've made no progress for all these years. But I know of no other way of going forward with this. It is conceivable that Mr. Gorbachev would just say, I fall over backwards and I'm prepared to make these vast reductions in conventional forces, because the balance in conventional forces is so much in favor of the Soviet Union, which has been worrying us for years.
And that's Mr. Kissinger's point.
Yeah, but the problem doesn't become any easier if we of course it's the conventional arms control negotiation is a difficult negotiation.
It's going to take time.
But if we do all the negotiating in the nuclear field, we continue to stigmatize and delegitimize the weapons by which we've established the balance to the conventional superiority of the Soviets, plus their geographic proximity, and we will leave the conventional superiority untouched with the argument that it's a very difficult negotiation. And it seems to me that it is absolutely reasonable of the administration to say we are negotiating a 50% reduction of strategic forces. We've taken out all our strategic, or practically all our strategic weapons from Europe. Now there has to be some progress in the conventional field before we take the residue of the tactical nuclear weapons out of Europe.
What's wrong with that, Mr. Ambassador, other than it being difficult to do?
In the first place, we have been negotiating on conventional forces. Nobody proposes that we not do that. We're doing it with the utmost urgency. I've been involved in this. We've done everything we could think of to stimulate and accelerate the negotiation on conventional forces. The question at issue is, should one delay in doing something that would save the German political scene and that would, if we could succeed, vastly improve the situation of NATO militarily?
Let me ask you this, Mr.
But it's the responsibility of political leaders to tell their people the truth and to tell them their necessities. There is no stopping point between 88 and 0 that makes any sense.
There was no.
So either we are saying there should be a senseless negotiation in order to be some sort of a drug for a short-term political problem that the German government has. And the German Chancellor is a close personal friend of mine for whom I have the greatest sympathy. But if he has to take the program of his opposition in order to get re-elected, then we have a really serious situation in Germany. It makes no sense to negotiate about these very few weapons that are there just to be able to say that one is helping a short-term political problem. It ought to be possible within the NATO alliance to come to some definition of security that honest people can explain to their public, and to redefine the relationship between Europe and the United States, between Western Germany and Europe, all of which are important issues.
Let me ask the ambassador.
I do not think that we can play this game of saying 88 short-range nuclear missiles are the key to German political stability.
What would be, in your opinion, Ambassador Nitze, what would be the negative result of the United States sticking with its position that it has right now?
As I said earlier, I think the combination of these two propositions, that A, we not negotiate, and B, that we ask the Germans to approve of the modernization of these 88 missiles, is politically impossible for any government in Germany. I don't think any government.
What does the fallout of that to the NATO alliance and the relationship with the United States and our position in Europe?
Because if Germany goes in the way in which, for instance, Mr. Genscher wants it to go.
He's the foreign minister of West Germany.
That's right. And does not support those who believe that it is most important for Germany to maintain a position of responsibility within NATO so that it can work with NATO and therefore with the United States. If those people are defeated, what will happen? I think that the scene in Germany will be dominated by the SPD and by the Greens.
The SPD, which is the most, the more liberal or to the left.
Very much to the left.
Yes.
And I don't see how you can put together a coalition which would be able to resist that.
So from your perspective, this is a political issue more than it is an arms control issue.
It's both political and military.
Yeah.
In fairness, it must be pointed out that the Bush administration has already put off the issue of modernization. The Bush administration is not pressing the Germans to modernize now. What the Bush administration is resisting is a negotiation on the short-range weapons whose practical consequence will be to tend towards zero, and on purely domestic political grounds in Germany. I recognize that Chancellor Kohl, who I repeat is a personal friend of mine, is in difficulties, and it gives me great sorrow that he's in difficulties. I do not believe in the long run that it will in fact help him if we adopt the program of his opponents. I believe it helps him more if we say we take the security of Europe so seriously that we will not engage in a sham negotiation that pretends that there is a number less than 88 that is more secure and that will, however, inevitably go to zero.
Let me ask you both an American question.
May I just respond to that? In the first place, I think that Henry has grossly misrepresented my position. After all, what I've said is I think we should first get agreement from the Germans that they will support us in a negotiation for equal ceilings. I said nothing about 88 missiles. In fact, I've said earlier on other occasions that it ought to be for a figure of, say, 200 to 300 missiles on both sides. But it should be equal ceilings. And today we don't have equal ceilings. When Henry says, you know, we've got some great asset here in these short-range missiles, it's really no asset at all that we've got there now. It is important to get down to equal ceilings. If one gets down to equal ceilings, then I think one has a much better opportunity to build support in Germany for the modernization of those remaining, what we would have the right to. That's the important thing.
Gentlemen, I had a great...
the easiest way to get to equal ceilings is for the Soviets to cut down to our ceiling. Then we'll be at equal ceilings, and then we can discuss how to go further. 88 doesn't give you a very big margin of discussion.
Gentlemen,
it's better than the current scene.
Gentlemen, I had a great last question to ask you both, but I'm not going to have time to ask it, and I'll ask it next time. Thank you both very much for being with us tonight.